Standard 3.1, creating experiences for learners to make positive, socially responsible contributions and exhibit empathetic behavior online that builds relationships and community. For Standard 3.1, I developed a mini lesson on empathy. The title of this lesson is Let's Be Empathetic Towards One Another. In this lesson, students looked at the concept of empathy and how it relates to the online world. Students were asked to look at what is empathy, how they can demonstrate empathy online, and how they can demonstrate empathy towards others. Resources that students needed for this lesson were scenario cards and 5 steps to empathy, overcoming obstacles, and the Class Dojo empathy videos. There were 3 videos by Class Dojo. At the beginning of the lesson, students were asked to think about a time when they were really embarrassed and how it made them feel. We talked about the meaning of the word empathy and whether students had heard the term before. And then we looked at the definition of empathy as being understanding how someone is feeling even if we are not in the same situation as them. The middle of the lesson looked at overcoming obstacles, 5 steps to empathy. There are 5 steps looking at empathy in an online environment. Those are pay attention to what people are saying and thinking before you posting. Connecting, so thinking about whether you have experienced a similar feeling or been in a similar situation and how did that make you feel. Imagining, how would this feel if it were to happen to you and how do you think the person feels right now. Asking how someone is feeling or if you can help them in any way. And acting on it. Talking to an adult if the scenario is still happening and showing people that you care through words and actions. After looking at the 5 steps of empathy, the students worked together on scenario cards. There's different scenario cards, and students were asked to identify how they would feel if they were in that situation and what would they do if it were to occur. At the end of the lesson, students were asked about their experiences with the scenario cards. We also talked about the importance of empathy and recognizing how someone feels. At the end of the lesson, we wrapped it up by talking about the acronym for THINK. T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? In addition, students had access to Class Dojo take-home questions and an additional video on empathy through kids' health. Students enjoyed this lesson and were able to truly identify the meaning of empathy and then take what they have learned into their online discussions and further use of digital resources through empathy. Standard 3.2 promotes student behaviors that encourage curiosity as they critically identify and examine online resources. In this lesson, students were asked to preview videos and then look at different websites to determine the credibility of those sites using the read it, check it, and wait method. At the beginning of the lesson, the students were asked to watch videos on BrainPop, including online sources, online safety, and internet search. Those videos can be found on brainpop.com. Each one addresses different aspects of online safety and using different websites. This one specifically looks at how some of it might be considered fool's gold. So Tim and Moby from BrainPop have different tools to determine whether a source can be trusted. After watching those 3 BrainPop videos, the students were then asked to go to Common Sense Media to look at an article on 5 ways to spot fake news. In this article, the students were to watch the video, and then when they scrolled down, they were looking specifically at these questions to determine what to do when encountering a piece of media. So they're looking at who made it, who the target audience is, who paid for it, who might benefit or be harmed from the message, what is left out of the message, and is it credible? After going through all of those videos and the article, the students were then provided with 3 different websites on the tree octopus. Here is one. Help save the endangered Pacific Northwest tree octopus from extinction. Here's another one on the tree octopi. And then a Wikipedia page on the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. After going through each of those websites, the students were then asked to go visit the websites again and use the read it, check it, and wait method. They were to read the whole article because sometimes the headlines can be misleading. They were then asked to check it by asking themselves who wrote the article, what is it written for, check the date of publication, and if there's any additional information online that matches the information being presented in that website. The last step is to wait. If the information appeared too good to be true, they needed to ask an adult to determine the credibility. Once students went through the read it, check it, and wait methodology, they determined that the tree octopus was not real. Moving forward, students will use the read it, check it, and wait method to determine whether the sources they are using for research projects or research in general are credible. Standard 3.3, mentor students in the safe, ethical, and legal practice with digital tools and protection of intellectual rights and property. For Standard 3.3, I created 3 different lessons for our digital citizenship class. The first lesson was a lesson on copyright. In this lesson, students focused on what is copyright and how to ask for permission to use something from online that was not created by them. For this lesson, students looked at some different vocabulary terms such as creator, copyright, license, plagiarism, attributes, and intellectual property. We talked about how students are all creators and asked about a time when they created something. Following that discussion, we asked students if they had ever used someone else's creation, such as a picture or quote from a book. After that discussion, we talked about the importance of giving permission back to whoever created what was used and talking about copyright. Students watched a Brain Pop copyright video. We talked about definition of copyright. We looked at the last couple definitions, intellectual property, license, plagiarism, and attributes. As a whole group, we filled in the blanks with the correct vocabulary term. With their table group, students completed part 2 of the handout, which went along with the Common Sense Media activity, reflecting on the information that was given. Once that was done, we asked each group to share their responses with the class. We reviewed the definitions from the chart, and we gave students the following scenario and asked whether it was okay or not okay to do what was given. And then students created a written response to use as a formative assessment on copyright. Another lesson was behaving ethically online. In this lesson, students worked on digital communication, ethics, and online scenarios. Students looked at determining what is right and what is wrong and how to best solve an online conflict ethically. For this lesson, we needed Brain Pop and Media Smart's online scenario cards. We asked students to do a brain dump on what they believe the word ethics means, talk to their table groups about their responses, and then come back together as a whole group to discuss some ideas. Students watched the Brain Pop video on ethics and wrote down some information as they were watching. We discussed how Tim from Brain Pop worked through those dilemmas ethically, and then we looked at some scenario cards. We wrapped up the lesson by coming back together and talking to the students about how they determined what was right and what was wrong. And then students completed the Brain Pop graphic organizer. If needed, they could rewatch the video. And then we took a quote by Potter Stewart on guidelines for behaving morally and ethically. The final lesson was a lesson on online safety called Let's Be Safe Online. In this lesson, students were required to think about how they can stay safe online and what is considered a safe and responsible and respectful activity. For this lesson, we used Brain Pop, Common Sense Media, Kids Health worksheets. At the beginning of the lesson, students were asked to answer the following questions. Do you spend any time online? What do you do online? Do you play games with other kids? Do you search things on the internet? And we discussed that as a whole class. We watched a Brain Pop online video. Students took the quiz at the end for a grade. After the quiz, they worked their table groups to create a digital safety poster, writing down 3 rules for internet safety. And then students presented their posters as a class. And after every group presented, we listed new rules for our own classroom on how to be safe online. And to wrap up the lesson, students answered the question, why is it important to be safe on the internet? They could have done this orally or through written response.